guests and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors.
It's Monday night at 9 p.m. and time for Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers. Dr. Ricky Siegel is a certified sex therapist, educator, and supervisor, and his brother Larry Siegel is a clinical sexologist and certified sexuality educator. The Siegel Brothers are here to answer all your questions about sex and sexuality, but we're unsure who to ask, including questions you didn't even know you had. They will also welcome guests from around the globe to talk about a wide variety of topics and issues within the fascinating world of sexuality. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to Sex Talk.
Good evening, and welcome to Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers. My name is Dr. Richard Siegel. I'm a certified sex therapist.
And I'm Larry Siegel, a clinical sexologist and certified sexuality educator.
And my super awesome big bro.
Yeah, my favorite role.
You don't mean that. But thanks for saying it. It sounds good on the radio.
No, I do, actually.
Yes, we just came back from an awesome time in Vienna.
Yes, indeed.
My brilliant brother was presenting at the International Conference on Senior Health, talking about seniors and sexuality and dementia. Mm-hmm. And I was a tourist. But I came right home from Vienna and had to stay in New York. I ghosted my flight. The airlines hate when you do that. But
a guy took your seat and he wouldn't stop talking to me.
See? So, I'm sorry to do that. And you had to fly home with my dirty laundry. Thank you for that, too. But stayed in New York for the STAR Clinical Case Conference, STAR, the Society for Sex Therapy and Research. And it is definitely the most amazing conference of the year. It's just so great. Let's say hello. Thank you for joining us. We're on the radio in South Florida.
Good
if
to have
anyone's
you
still
here.
Listening to the radio, we're on 95.3 FM and 1470 AM on WNN. And we're streaming live on Facebook. If you're watching on Facebook, hello. Thank you for joining us. And please hit that like and share button and help us spread the word. Because if everyone was talking about sex, not just on Monday nights at 9 o'clock, but all the time, maybe we wouldn't be in the mess that we're in.
This is true.
The supposedly greatest country in the world has some of the most dismal sexual health.
Well,
it is embarrassing.
It's a matter of perspective. I mean, we lead the world in so many things.
Yeah, we're number one.
We're number one, right? We lead the world in virtually everything that can go wrong with sexuality.
Marker of poor sexual health, sexually transmitted infections, unintended pregnancies, abusive relationships, abortion rates.
Right. By the way, especially intimate partner violence among adolescents.
Right. So it's been so crazy. It's been a crazy month. It almost got away from us, but it's still officially September, which is Sexual Health Month.
Sexual Health Month, which is I believe the 9th month the American Sexual Health Association has declared, and the 10th year that the World Association of Sexology has actually designated a Sexual Health Day, which I believe was the 4th.
Yeah.
So we're kind
Early
of now coming after 10 years of acknowledging this and honoring this. And I would love to hear what other people have to say about where we've come in these 10 years.
Right.
What is the status of sexual health? What does sexual health mean to you? Give us a call if you're listening on the radio, 888-565-1470. And if you are watching us live on Facebook, go ahead and submit something via that
Just go to the
question
Sex
button.
Talk with the Siegel Brothers Facebook page, and there's a button there that says send email or send a PM and join the
There
conversation.
you go. Right, and tell us what this means to you. But, this is this conversation. Sexual Health Month, again, 10 years now. What are we getting for it?
Yeah, and where's the increased awareness and the focus on improving sexuality education that has, everybody knows the same old the classic definition of doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result.
Right. Well,
nothing has changed.
Einstein's joke that's not very funny.
Yeah, nothing's changed significantly in sex ed, except for the small handful of people, most of whom we probably know through our professional families, who are, carving it out and banging their drums in communities and pockets around the country. But for the most part, nothing institutionalized, nothing standardized as far as states legislating sex ed, or if they do, they're not enforced.
Well, actually, we're going backwards with a lot of that.
School districts, quote unquote, legislate sex ed policy, and it's never enforced by the principals in the schools. Basically, kids get no more and no better sex ed in schools today than they did when we were working for Planned Parenthood in the late 80s and early 90s, and
Right.
90s to 2000s when I took over your job. Where does where is the sexual health? Well, it's a funny question because I
Right.
was going to say, where's the health?
Well, yeah, overall, but especially where's the sexual health? But you know what? On that note, though, this idea again, looking at sexual health and looking what the results of work that's been done and things like that, I do want to give a shout out to all of those parents who, growing up, have considered themselves all progressive, especially now the parents of Gen Xers, parents of millennials, all these people that were really so socially conscious. I want to give a shout out to them for screwing everything up. Right? And I want to know what happened. Right?
Yeah.
What happened? They were supposed to be so progressive. They were living their lives. These are the parents that are resisting sex ed. These are the parents that refuse to let this stuff happen. So what happened?
When we started, 25 and 30 years ago, it was the first realization was, wait a minute, we got hippies kids in the room, right? We'd see 16, 17, 18-year-olds and do the math backwards and say, well, their parents are 30-something and 40. Wait, they were hippies or 70s kids, and they were no more comfortable talking to their kids
Right.
than our, 50s Ozzie and Harriet kind of parents didn't talk. Our generation's parents didn't talk to us about sex.
Okay, but isn't it ironic that
And
these
then
were the
the next
generations
generation-
demanding change?
Well, of course. Right?
That's what I can't wrap my head around.
Yeah. I remember David Crosby saying, we were right about everything, that peace is better than war and love is better than hate, all of the ideals, the hippie ideals, but obviously, he knows better than most. They were wrong about the drug thing. The drugs being the keys to consciousness expansion and peace on earth. But you know what? They were wrong about the sex stuff too, because it was the ends,
Right.
regardless of any means were justified to get to that so-called, at least on the surface, sexual liberation. But there was no movement towards the comfort, so that when these hippies that were running naked in Golden Gate Park and burning their bras, when they became middle-aged parents, nobody's talking to their
Right.
kids about sex. I remember saying, if hippies can't talk to their kids about sex, who can? We're doomed.
Well, but I think this was all, and I think that's a really important point, because when we look at the fact that all that changed was an attitude. And it really became, I think this is when you're not the boss of me, or you can't tell me what to do, became kind of the basis of social movement.
Yeah.
And that's really all that changed. And,
But
the
now it's
sexual
our
liberation.
peers. Now, what's our generation's excuse? Because
there
our
is
peers
none.
aren't talking to their
Discomfort.
kids about sex.
Discomfort, talking about it, not knowing
Well, 'cause
how,
we grew up
still
with
not having
AIDS,
that many
right?
resources.
We grew up with sex getting scary and deadly and dangerous.
Well, yeah. But again, enough of us were fighting that too, that I think the idea of, if you have sex, you will get a deadly disease and die, so don't have sex, kind of, hopefully, no pun intended, came and went. And is not really that much, I think. I mean, as all the negativity, there isn't the doom and gloom that there used to be.
Weren't we just on the CDC's website
Well, that
an hour ago?
And okay.
In 2019. Right.
So to that point,
the Centers for Disease Control. Well, okay.
Right.
We really wanted to share tonight. Not appropriate to read on the radio, but it's a very quick, very concise, perfect little paragraph that we wanted to share in honor of this topic, this critically important topic of sexual health. This is the current working definition of sexual health by the World Health Organization.
right, that they established, I believe, in 2003.
Right. So this is not hot off the press.
Right.
It is described as, and I quote, a state of physical, emotional, mental, and social well-being in relation to sexuality. It is not merely the absence of disease. Along the decades we've been saying that. Disease, dysfunction, or infirmity. Sexual health requires a positive and respectful approach to sexuality and sexual relationships, all relationships, as well as the possibility of having pleasurable and safe sexual experiences free of coercion, discrimination, and violence. For sexual health to be attained and maintained, the sexual rights of all persons must be respected, protected, and fulfilled. And the greatest country in the world fails dismally to live up to that simple but powerful and profound, what should be a promise, a human right.
Absolutely.
And we continue to, in the 21st century, we fail to live up to that simple an idea.
And in part of the World Health Organization, when they're explaining a lot of that stuff, they do actually make a point of specifying that pleasure, particularly mutually pleasurable relationships, pleasure within a framework of an individual's value system, is a really important aspect of sexuality. Now, our government, again, mentioned the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, or if you go into the National Institutes of Health, any sort of official a statement about sexuality is using the World Health Organization. But here's a challenge. Right? Probably a more difficult challenge than finding an organic tomato in Newark, New Jersey. I remember Larry Wilmore did a little thing years ago to try to talk about food deserts. I would challenge anybody to go on the U.S. government Centers for Disease Control or NIH website and find anything about pleasure.
Right. Well, the word is there because the first thing on the sexual health page under the CDC is that same definition I read. But everything immediately next to it, sexual risk behaviors can lead to HIV, STDs, and teen pregnancy. Don't you know? It's gloom and doom at every panel.
Right.
It's youth violence, youth risk behavior surveys, and at each of the clickable boxes for more information. STDs, first one.
Right.
Always first one. Reproductive health, sexual violence prevention, healthy pregnancy, HIV and AIDS prevention.
Okay, but to back up for a second, though, again, reproductive health, when that's a sort of a category or a heading, that simply and strictly means unintended pregnancy.
Right, of course. That's a
Because
buzzword.
it's got to be a negative consequence.
Right. Yeah, of course. And why is HIV/AIDS prevention a different category from sexually transmitted diseases?
Well, the same way alcohol is separated from drug.
Exactly. And LGBT health gets a clickable box. But related links?
No.
Nothing.
Nothing about eroticism. Nothing about
about
pleasure. Nothing about body awareness.
No.
Right? Nothing about
And
emotional
these,
skills.
I want to point out that a lot of people, too many people hear these terms like coercion, discrimination, and violence and want to go to like human trafficking and sex slave trade.
Sure.
But there are wives. There are millions and millions of wives and men and women in relationships in this country who are not free of coercion, discrimination, and violence.
We've mentioned that here.
In their sexual relationship.
And we've mentioned that here just from the standpoint of when somebody says, I don't really want to, I'm not really into it, and that's followed by, oh, come on, just a little bit, oh, come on. That's coercion.
Yeah. But, I mean, all the way to violence.
Right. And, well, it's a continuum.
Imagine, even today, this is another thing that still will never stop blowing my mind, that there are still men who are shocked and surprised as they're being handcuffed and charged with spousal rape.
Right.
They're like, what did I do? What did I do? It doesn't even register that the words rape and wife or spouse or intimate partner can go in the same sentence.
Right. And let's add to the shout out that I kind of gave before to these parents who are raising the kids that are woefully ignorant today. And again, those parents in particular who are so upset about the ubiquitousness of porn. And, all these kids are looking at porn. Well, you know what? Congratulations. This is your accomplishment. Right? What option have we given people?
Right.
And I would go back to, again, looking at sexual health, even as a sexual health professional, for how many years have we also criticized this idea of throwing condoms at people is not the answer either. And when you pretty much set up only two choices, especially for adolescents, but for people in general, of condoms or abstinence, which basically is you have intercourse or you do nothing, what do you think people are going to do? Right? What kind of choice is that? So when we give no sex ed, when we have no context for pleasure and fantasy, we have no context for porn that people can understand it in, then there's no sex ed. So what, by de facto resource that's available to everybody is simply porn.
Yeah. When is the upcoming episode of Lisa Ling's show on CNN? Is it this coming weekend? Were you?
I believe
did
so.
Did you get to talk to somebody? I know one of the producers was in touch.
I don't think that's going to be for this one though, because I think it's too soon. But another one to be contributing.
She's talking about asking young people. I saw in the trailer. It's basically, is this your sex ed? Mm-hmm. And I don't need to watch the show to know what their answer is going to be.
Of course, there is no alternative. Right? So, I mean, again, these parents that don't want their kids hearing about sex ed, they're leaving them with no other choice.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's really something that we can't emphasize enough, that we are giving kids no other choice but then to make what too many would call bad decisions.
And I got to believe that a huge part of our continued inability to grasp anything close to sexual health is our ongoing frenzy for sexual disease and pathology.
Yeah,
that
that's the
sexual
obsession.
pleasure and masturbation and porn, which, how often do we have to say it? It's never about the porn.
Right.
This torch and pitchfork mentality of storming the state house in every state to demand that porn be labeled a public health crisis is because we're still too childish and immature and uncomfortable talking about masturbation.
Well, that's a big one, absolutely.
And the fact that sex in too many relationships is so difficult and making people nuts trying to navigate it, that it's just become, if it starts out as if it's naturally the default education, it's also the default outlet for millions of people who are in relationships and would rather, that Don John theme, that film about the guy that can basically score any weekend, anytime he wants, and would rather be by himself in front of the computer. Now, instead of going, oh my God, see, that's porn addiction. Why don't we say what's going on with people's relationship with their sexuality and relationship with each other, that sex and anxiety have become so linked.
Yes, exactly.
That expectations about what sex is supposed to look like in relationships and why our relationship is not as good as everyone else's, and all these other anxieties that just
and it is a piling up of these anxieties.
What's more ironic than succeeding in making sex unsexy?
Right. Well, again, I think part of the foundation of all of that, what a lot of these anxieties are sitting on, is I think there's this just interpersonal inability, right? This sense of people don't know how to connect intimately. So when people are spending so much time, and especially with younger people, and this is what I also kind of talked a little bit about in that CNN piece, that people get so used to acting alone. They get used to a particular kind of touch. And, one of the things that, we remind everybody that does this work.
Right.
It's always a big issue for so many men to just suggest that they masturbate with their other hand.
Right.
And that can kind of rock their world.
Right.
That creates discomfort. The feeling is different. And if your own hand is foreign to you, another person, another living, breathing human being that you're already anxious about connecting with,
Right.
and don't know how to open yourself up and be with. Now that's what all these other anxieties and sexual anxieties are sitting
Right.
on.
So loud and clear for the record, so there's no confusion, at least for our little world here. There is absolutely no such thing, no such diagnosis as PIED. And just because, another obsession, if you give it an acronym, it must be real.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Oh, but it has
It's
an acronym.
Oh, okay. There you go.
Porn-induced erectile dysfunction is a steaming turd of a complete missing the point.
Yes.
There's no such
Yes.
thing. Guys don't get desensitized or so addicted to porn they can't even get aroused without it. It goes back to, it starts with that point.
Right. And I think
There is no, but when a guy has a relationship with that death grip, there is
Right.
no body part on any other person that's going to come close to matching
Right.
that.
And-
when we were in high school, it used to be a joke, right? About
That's right.
sleeping on your arm.
Exactly.
So when you wake up in the morning, it's like getting a handy from a stranger.
Right.
Right. But it's
very different.
mixing up the repertoire, learning
Yes.
about one's sexual response and responses and
That's
pleasures
responses, the
before
slate of
they are
responses.
even thinking about being with another person. That's that phobia that we can't talk to kids about sex and pleasure because we'll give them permission. How about giving them permission to derive pleasure from their bodies?
Yes.
Instead of slapping their hands when they're in the playpen and tell them, "Don't touch that, you'll go blind."
Oh, yeah. Well, that's, hey, another thing I'm looking forward to in October, doing another one of those turn on the lights, talking, doing this child abuse prevention conference where we're talking about that kids are sexual beings and
Yeah.
that these are, something that we have to understand and not abuse our kids with this kind of negativity.
We can't say that often enough either. Neglect is abuse.
Yeah.
And withholding information because you're too uncomfortable is a form of abusing your kids. Denying them the information and denying them that they have the right to live in a world that allows this to be, and I'll say it again, for sexual health to be attained and maintained, the sexual rights of all persons must be respected, protected, and fulfilled. We suck at that.
Yes. Yes.
We have so far to go in this country at just that one thing. And that's a dire warning that it says we cannot get there and we can't stay there. Sexual health cannot be attained and maintained. So,
Right. And part of, again, when we look at some of these dimensions of sexual health, right, to kind of, make some of these kind of specific points with the time that we have left. Although I want to go back and just throw in a little comment to clinicians, again, more related to that porn-induced erectile dysfunction nonsense,
Yeah.
that, there is a big difference between habitual and habituation. And I think clinicians are a little too quick to go into habituation when, no, this is habitual.
right.
And that really does
Well,
continue
you
to
know,
reinforce itself.
I know this show goes too fast. We need an hour. We need sponsors so we can get an hour-long show. I heard this over the weekend, and I don't know why stuff like this still blows my mind, but kids are not only not in a hurry, but many are resistant to get their driver's licenses.
Oh, of course.
Like,
Of course.
When-
That means leave the house.
and why would they have to? When
Right.
their whole world, their whole
Right.
community, their whole interaction, their whole intimacy, everything.
All online.
When we were that age, oh my God, we couldn't wait. Talk about
That's right.
champing at the bit to get our.
That's right.
That was freedom,
Yep.
right? No, I don't want to. How does a kid not want to get a driver's license?
Well,
That's
again, that
insane
whole
to me.
failure to launch,
Yeah.
that we've seen in the last two generations, more than we ever have.
It is insane to me.
But again, I think part of that also speaks to why it's become even more difficult. Right? Going back into these sort of domains of sexual health, these, the sense of body integrity, especially related to sexual safety. Again, mentioning, kids, we talk about how being able to understand and know these parts of your body. If you can name it, you can own it. Right? Yet we hide the names, right? We want to keep it a secret from little boys that they have a penis. We want to not let little girls know they have a vagina. Forget letting them know she has a clitoris.
No.
Right?
That
So, I mean, that has to be a secret. So, how do we expect? One of the things that is important aspects of sexual health is to be able to take care of and be responsible for this body that we are using as this vessel for pleasure and connection and whatever else we want to ascribe to it. But it's about taking care of it, regular checkups, knowing to recognize when things may not be right, knowing to get help, but always being open and questioning and being aware of our body.
right.
Right? That's like number one. And that's one of the first sort of conditioning problems that we see in how we're raising kids that are not sexually healthy. We're teaching them to disconnect from their body.
And adults aren't, of course, aren't connected to their own. I forgot who said recently, who in their right mind would take their car to a mechanic and not mention all the knocks and pings and symptoms that they hear in their car. Mm-hmm. But people go to the doctors and they don't talk about
That's right.
sexual problems.
And doctors
or
don't
issues.
ask.
And yeah, patients are afraid to embarrass the doctor. Remember that?
Oh,
that
don't start me on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And yeah,
especially older people.
physicians don't ask.
Right, they don't ask. So that has to be, one of the things. And we can definitely do something about that. But that's an important aspect of sexual health,
Right.
that connection to our own bodies. The idea of eroticism and pleasure. Right? We can, and you've said this before, we've said this earlier, we cannot run away from that. That is a very basic, that should be a part of our humanity that we celebrate. How is it that that is the thing we're most afraid of?
The best perk of being in these bodies, the things that they can do. And no.
Right. So we've got to change our whole sort of connection and relationship with pleasure.
Right.
And not see this as some monster. I don't get that.
Well, we do. It's a long history of pleasure phobia that unfortunately mostly comes from religion and morality, and this connection of pleasure to pleasures of the flesh, to vice and sin, and
Right. I've asked a panel of priests before, in this debate about what sex is for, kind of thing, and
what's clitoris for?
for especially
Boy,
for
they get
people that want to be
uncomfortable.
religious and faith, and if you're going to kind of steep yourself in God, who invented the clitoris and why?
Invented.
What's it for?
That's a good word.
So
choice.
if this is not supposed to be pleasurable, if we're not supposed to enjoy pleasure, then somebody screwed up.
Absolutely.
Right?
It's individual. It's it's familial. It's relational. It's communal. It's spiritual. It's every sphere, every aspect of not just health, but
Humanity.
humanness.
Yeah, it really
It is what we are as human beings.
And again, that's part of the irony. Why we're so disconnected from all of this. Because when we talk about sexuality and we talk about our sexual health, we really are talking about the core of our being, right? The
Right.
core of our personhood.
And yet, we obsess on genital acts.
Right.
And who's doing what to whom with their genitals.
Right. And that's part of that genital obsession that does keep us in this sexually unhealthy place. So if we want to really become sexually healthy, the organ that needs to change is the one between the ears. It's got to be the attitudinal change.
That's right. Well, you know what the music means. Thank you for joining us, and please join us next Monday and every Monday at 9 o'clock on the East Coast and live on Facebook, and watch some old shows on YouTube, and tell your friends, and like and share. And thanks for joining us on Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers.
Yes. Have a great week. Thank you all. Good night.
You've been listening to Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers. Join us every Monday night at 9 p.m. on WNN, 1470 AM and 95.3 FM. Or watch live streaming video at AMP2 TV Productions on Facebook, or look for the shows on YouTube. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you'll join us again next week.
The opinions